Hi, my name's Phil and I like talking about in politics, and in this video we're going to take another look at the prospect of the great US-UK trade deal. Great for the US, that is. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, the details of the US-UK trade deal that Boris Johnson is keen to sign in order to pretend that post-Brexit Britain has a bright future has cropped up yet again with a statement from the head of the farming lobby in the United States. So what I'd like to do is explain what the farming lobby have been saying, why it's not quite true, and then take a look at what the US document says regarding their intentions for the trade deal on food. So, Zippy Duval, yes, that's really his name, is the head of the American Farm Bureau. In attempting to allay fears about some of the foods that the deal would involve us accepting, he described issues around chlorine washing and GM foods as not science-based. So I need to tackle those again. Here's what the American Farm Bureau will be saying about chlorine-washed chicken, for example. They will point out that the reason the EU bans it is simply protectionism, and they point to the fact that chlorine-washed salad is fine in the EU, so there's no harm in chlorine washing. But that is to deliberately misrepresent the issue. Nobody is saying that the chlorine itself is harmful. We swim in chlorinated water, for goodness sake. The reason why the chlorine-washed chicken is banned in the EU is not because of the chlorine washing, that's a myth. And it's also why it's sometimes unhelpful to describe the food as chlorinated chicken, because it makes it easier for them to fool people in the UK. The issue is that many facilities in the US that use chlorination do not observe suitable standards of hygiene earlier in the production process. They wrongly assume that the chlorination will kill the harmful bacteria at the end, and so cut costs by removing systems of hygiene earlier on. The reason this stuff is banned in the EU is because this fallacy kills Americans, and is something that could kill far fewer if they observed those practices that are law in the EU. The two bacteria largely associated with poor standards of hygiene with chickens are Salmonella and Campylobacter. Between them, these kill about 650 Americans a year. In the EU, the latest data I have, worst case year, was 237. And that actually includes EEA countries that are not part of the EU as well. And the difference is even more stark when you consider the populations. Population of the USA is a little under 330 million. But is well over 500 million for the EU and other EEA nations. Yes, deaths do still occur in the EU. Chicken is a very popular meat that harbours some pretty nasty bacteria. But where improved hygiene standards can improve the odds, this is what the EU does. It looks out for its people rather than simply profit. So if these chicken producers were to implement the same hygiene standards in their US facilities, then not only would fewer Americans die and fewer American families' lives be ruined, but they could sell in the EU no problems. Of course, let's put it into perspective, these chickens will kill fewer British citizens than the Tories in government. I believe the figure for that since 2010 is about 130,000 now. But we did vote for them. We did not vote to lower our food standards. As for the GM foods, I'm a big fan in general. Genetically modified foods have helped solve nutritional crises around the world. But GM foods are not illegal in the EU. Or at least they're not outlawed in the EU itself. Rules on GM foods are pretty much down to individual member states. Perhaps because some EU nations bar them, Mr. Duval is under the impression that it's an EU rule. There's a requirement to demonstrate that they're safe, but again it's down to individual nations to sort that out. The bottom line is that there is a lot of food produced in the US that is perfectly safe, most of it even, and that food may already be traded with the UK. Were the US to offer the UK a trade deal, then we might even buy more of it as it would be cheaper. Actually, who am I kidding? The Americans don't need to strike a trade deal with us to buy their good food cheaper. Our government is planning on reducing import tariffs to pretty much zero on almost everything. So if we're not going to charge import tariffs on food after Brexit, why is the farming lobby pushing so hard for their sector to be front and centre of any agreement? Purely down to hygiene and safety laws. They need us to change the law to accept the small minority of food with unacceptably low health standards to be allowed into the country. This, of course, would undercut British chicken producers who would be forced to lower their own standards to compete, unless, of course, they produce for the high-end market. Jacob Rees-Mogg says that he isn't worried at all about chlorinated chicken. Of course not, he won't be eating it. So for those who don't know, the US produced a document a while ago of their demands. Call them a negotiating position if you will, but neither Trump nor Johnson want to negotiate. Johnson promised a quick deal and Trump promised America first. We can see where this is going. Regarding food, the document says, and I quote, "Establish a mechanism to remove expeditiously unwarranted barriers that block the export of US food and agricultural products." And there it is. They don't want any blocks on US food exports to the UK. Nothing about removing blocks on UK food. Bear in mind all countries have their standards and there are UK foods that may not be sold in the US. US-based Scots, for example, get very upset on Burns Night because they're not allowed to pretend to like haggis. Also, as a little aside, another great line, Buy America requirements on federal assistance to state and local projects, transportation services, food assistance and farm support. So ensuring that lots of their sectors aren't tempted by the potential for UK food imports. Regardless of price, they are forced to buy American. Another American dignitary, John Bolton, one of Trump's advisors, was also building up the farming side of the trade deal recently. He said that a trade treaty without agriculture would be turning their back on rural America. He described it as where a big part of their population lives. What he meant, of course, was it's a big part of where the Republican population lives. So if the American farmers aren't happy, then there will be no trade deal. And yes, at this point I have to provide the obligatory message that Congress have said that they will block any trade deal if the UK violates or even endangers the Good Friday Agreement. Although they haven't been explicit, this is expected to mean in the event of a no-deal Brexit. So we may be safe from these food health concerns anyway. But just as a little aside, you might suppose that people would just avoid the chlorinated chicken if it's such a hazard. But there are a couple of things about this. The first is that the very poor can't afford to be choosy. So it would be a policy that, as with every other Tory policy, disproportionately hurts the poorest in society. But the second is another line in that document. Now, this may not be related to foodstuffs, but I have a nagging concern. It says, establish new and enforceable rules to eliminate unjustified trade restrictions or unjustified commercial requirements, including unjustified labelling that affect new technologies. Now, food labelling in the US is nowhere near as clear as it is in the EU. That new technologies bit through me, so like I said, I don't know that this would relate to food products, but if it did, then you couldn't even avoid it. What if the labelling laws were changed so that you didn't even know the country of origin, much less whether it was chlorinated chicken or not? And if you're thinking, just stay away from the very cheapest chicken, well, that won't stop you eating it when served in a restaurant or takeaway. But I am fully expecting that if this trade deal does somehow go ahead, that the lowering of food standards would be barely a blip. Because people are focusing on the wrong things, they'll buy the explanations and accept that the reason we don't have those products now is just EU protectionism. After all, the EU is protectionist. That's not a lie. But American beef is good at least. We could have that. The stuff that isn't hormone injected anyway. Although so is Scottish beef and none of that is hormone injected. Wondering if labelling will allow me to tell the difference. Oh well, there's always Oreos. I think we can agree at least that that is a great American export. Though they are already legal, we can already get those. But anyway, I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.